very good morning, everyone. The title of my paper here is Trust, an Instrument of Decision Making in Philosophical Counseling. I'll quickly give a brief of what the paper is all about. This paper attempts at drawing a relationship between trust and decision making in philosophical counseling. The primary focus of the paper lies at the process of self-introspection of a patient and the trust needed to be placed at oneself in order to make ethical decisions pertaining to one's problems. The paper begins with a discussion on how philosophical practice can be an activity of the self and its relationship with ethical decision making. Such a critical self-awareness brings in the view of Kierkegaard and his conception of truth, where he says that truth is a subjective activity, making reaching at truth via philosophical practice a subjective or an activity of the self. It further advocates for developing trust on oneself by means of confidence-building techniques, which finds relevance in decision making. Lastly, the paper points at a negative impact of having to trust oneself for decision making in philosophical counseling. So these are a few of the questions to ponder about, and I will briefly give an introduction to what it's about. One of the ways to define a concept is by enumerating its essence by means of either its characteristics or its functions. Philosophical counseling aims at helping clients use their thought process to arrive at solutions to their mental, emotional, or ethical problems. Ways of thinking influence our ways of feeling, desiring, choosing, creating, and being in the world. In a way, philosophical counseling helps in reaching the personal truth of a client, which enables her to be aligned with her inner peace. Such an analysis of philosophical counseling suggests the validity of subjective truths as coined by Kierkegaard. So, Kierkegaard and subjective truth. One of the things for which Kierkegaard is both best known to philosophers and most criticized by them is his contention that truth is subjectivity. His discussion of truth and subjectivity occupies a considerable part of his most important philosophical concluding unscientific postscript. The primary question which Kierkegaard posits is, what does it mean to exist as a human being? His main contention is that his contemporaries have forgotten what it means to exist. He feels that they have come to think that man is to be viewed primarily as a knower, and that his most important capacity is that of attaining knowledge. For the attainment of knowledge, an attitude of objectivity is required, and cultivating it suppresses one's personality and individuality, which in a way leads to self-annihilation. Kierkegaard is determined to remind us what it means to be a human being. Of course, he grants that we can be knowers, but the knower is an existing individual, and the task of existing is his task. Existing in inwardness as finite particular individuals is what he holds to be our essential task as human beings. And so, using the term truth in one of the ways Hegel does, he says that for a human being, existing, the process of transformation to inward and by existing, is the truth. In other words, a man is in a state of truth with reference to his essential nature when he is living in such a way that his actual corresponds to his essential nature when he is in actuality as he ought essentially to be. So philosophical counseling can be seen as an activity of the self, and the fundamental question which lies behind it is the ethical decision making which goes behind it. So philosophical counseling, when seen as an activity of the self, it deals with questions of life in a more radical and philosophical manner than being a therapeutic way of dealing with emotions. According to Achenbach and Lahav, the point is to help the client become a more authentic and autonomous thinker. It is geared not so much to finding a solution to their problems as it is to deepening their philosophical insight and self-knowledge in the light of an honest confrontation with fundamental practical questions. Thus, Lahav claims that when clients achieve a richer and more adequate self-understanding, they enjoy enhanced autonomy in confronting their fundamental life possibilities. Of the many varieties of self-knowledge, the one that directly concerns philosophical counseling is moral and practical self-knowledge. Practical self-knowledge may be characterized as the kind of knowledge which would be ascribed to a person who has assumed a stance of reflective self-inquiry and self-evaluation with respect to her deepest beliefs, commitments, projects, values, and ideals. Achenbach, for instance, describes philosophical practice as geared towards sustained self-questioning with respect to hidden assumptions, biases, and beliefs. This rightly captures the open-ended nature of philosophical questioning, which is to raise questions for the sake of getting closer to something, namely the truth. Now, philosophical counseling and ethical decision-making. Rudy and Schweitzer, in their paper, In the Moment, The Effect of Mindfulness on Ethical Decision-Making, refer to mindfulness as an individual's awareness, both internally and externally. There lies a close relationship between philosophical counseling and the method of mindfulness in reaching a state of healthy minds of the clients. This mindfulness proves beneficial in ethical decision-making. Thus, philosophical counseling entails decision-making via mindfulness. Mindfulness has its origins in Buddhism and represents a quality of consciousness termed bare attention. There are two ways in which we expect mindfulness to promote ethical decision. First is mindfulness associated with greater self-awareness of one's environment. And second is self-awareness, greater self-awareness, which curtails unethical behavior. I'm not going into the details of it right now, but we can discuss it later if there is a question regarding it. Next is trust and ethical decision-making. Trust, along with its various kinds, is important, dangerous, and risky. It's important because it helps build autonomy of a person, dangerous because if misplaced, then it can lead to blunders in moral judgment, and risky because you cannot entirely know if your trust will be well returned. The philosophical dimension of trust includes the conceptual nature of trust and trustworthiness, the epistemology of trust, the value of trust, and the kind of mental attitude trust is. For the current study, only the first aspect of trust is evaluated as given below. Trust requires that we can, number one, be vulnerable to others, number two, rely on others to be competent to do what we wish them to do, and rely them to be willing to do it. Notice that the second two conditions refer to a connection between trust and reliance. For most philosophers, trust is a kind of reliance, although it is not mere reliance. Rather, trust involves reliance plus some extra factor. Controversy surrounds this extra factor, which generally concerns why the truster would rely on the trustee to be willing to do what they are trusted to do. Similarly, conditions for trustworthiness are that the trustworthy person is competent and willing to do what they are trusted to do. Yet, this person may also have to be willing for certain reasons or as a result of having a certain kind of motive for acting. The extra factor that lies in trust is intuition. For now, it is important to note that trust plays an important role in decision making. Whether people make decisions ethically or not is not a trivial matter. The outcome of decisions can make a significant difference to one's lives and to the lives of others. Kohlberg describes ethical decision making as a rational process. He states that people reason through moral dilemmas and life problems by applying moral principles of deontology, utilitarianism, or some other criteria. In terms of an actual decision-making, Rest's model is influential. It describes ethical decision-making as consisting of four generic steps: identifying the moral issue, making a moral judgment, establishing moral intent, and engaging in moral action, which is the decision made. The moment a person wills to commit an action, that is the moment she can call herself to be trustworthy and can trust herself to proceed with the completion of the action. At this point, if one does not commit the action, it is a mere failure and not a cause to label oneself as untrustworthy. The precedence of will to act after due mental deliberation over inaction proves that trust can be placed on oneself. Since the present discussion is about self-trust, therefore it can safely be bypassed how a client can trust a philosophical practitioner, and it can be argued, well, why on the other hand a counselor trusts her to help a client. The moment one arrives at a decision is the very moment she can trust to commit the required action. Thus, trust and decision-making go hand in hand. Trust and intuition. In philosophical counseling, decision-making takes a central role in coming up with plausible solutions and course of action problems of a client. No two problems are exactly similar, and so no two problems have similar solutions. It's the matters of universal importance, as in business ethics, where objective truths and facts are for decision making. But in philosophical counseling, individuals have their own personal truths to reach at, making subjective truths more valuable than objective ones. This gap between the two is filled in by trust. It is the trust in one's will to act upon a decision which makes up for a personal truth of a client, which is an amalgamation of objective and subjective. For appropriate decision making and having trust on oneself, the subconscious mind also creeps in by way of intuition to determine whether or not the following course of action is fit for performing. This indefinable trust, or the extra factor as mentioned above, is because of intuition. Betch and Glockner suggest that intuition is capable of quickly processing multiple pieces of information without noticeable cognitive effort. Thus, decision making run parallelly to each other, with intuition intersecting at the moment when an agent finally wills to perform an action decided upon. But one problem which I would like to point out here is that intuition, whether intuition is rational or non-rational. So that is a question to ponder about. In the conclusion, I would like to say that philosophical counseling with a client must include a regimen of self-confidence, self-respect, and self-esteem also, because this only will pave the way for better decision-making capacity of a client for herself in future. A sense that one is unworthy, that one lacks integrity and competence bodes ill for personal happiness and leaves a person open to exploitation and manipulation by others. To have goals and pursue them, to experience and remember confidently, to interpret reality according to one's own norms and style, to assert that one's own interests and needs count for something, all this requires self-trust. One with little or no self-trust is constantly open to having his or her beliefs and values put aside by others and is thereby deprived of any internal source of constancy that could provide for the appraisal of beliefs, values, choices, and actions, and the reconciliation of conflicting desires and goals. Because pressure from outside the self is variable in nature, the integration of the self must come from within. Thank you.